Welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast.
All right, Jason, welcome to the Look Good, Move Well podcast. Thanks for joining us. And why don't you tell everybody where you are in the world right now?
So I am in New Hampshire, southern New Hampshire. I'm about an hour north of Boston, and I'm from Massachusetts originally. So I moved up to New Hampshire almost 3 years ago now. It's pretty cold here. It's like in the 20s the last few days. So I know, you being on the West Coast, you used to 75 sunny year round. Is that that's what people envision of California. We're in like San Francisco, kind of the northern. Oh, gotcha. Which is considered northern, which is funny because it's the middle of the state. But I was out for my morning walk this morning before we talked. And it was in the low 40s. So it's not sunny and 70 every day, but we're soft out here. That's for sure. Well, I mean, it's all relative, right? Because, people in Florida or, anywhere where there's humidity, like I don't know how they do the humidity.
Yeah, right?
I don't work well in the humidity at all. And I train from home and I've got a garage gym and there's no AC. So it's, luckily we don't get a ton of the humidity. So if we did, it would be a different story.
There's some of it for sure. We spent some time out and back east, and our listeners know that I was in Massachusetts for a bunch this summer. And
is that where you got shamed at the pool?
No, that happened to be right down the street from our home, unfortunately. But no, our time out. What I did learn is y'all have a good fair amount of bugs out there, and the bugs that got me good. I was not prepared for the mosquito situation that we encountered.
Yeah, it's aggressive. I mean, the more north you go, the more woods. I mean, we're surrounded by woods, so it's just you got to take some preventative measures to get rid of the mosquitoes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, we could let's dive right in. The context is you reviewed Persist, our online training program recently, and I don't want to say that that's what you do because you are a coach. To a lot of people will get into talking about your coaching background. But as a service to people, one of your content pieces that you put out on YouTube is reviews of programs. And your title on your Instagram profile is the King of Programming, which I hear there's a funny story behind. If you want to just share that briefly. Something about your wife having something to do with maybe naming you that.
Yeah, my wife is she's really great with everything related to marketing, and she's gotten really good over the years. And I admittedly am not great at that piece. I don't like talking about myself at all, and I was actually against doing programming reviews. It was my wife's idea years ago, and this is when we were. I had a service where I was writing programming for CrossFit boxes. The first half of my online journey started programming for CrossFit boxes. And she's like, as the market we were kind of one of the first people in the space. And as the market got more flooded, she's like, you should review some of these programs. I'm like, I don't want to do that. And needless to say, come full circle. And now 2023, we're doing them. But that was her idea. The King of Programming name, she literally put it in my bio one day on Instagram, and I didn't even know it. And the next day, our business coach was like, "Oh man, I love this King of Programming. It's so cool. It's so clear." And I was like, "Oh, geez, I guess I didn't even know that was there. And now I guess I have to keep it." So
sure.
So now it's become the thing. And I some of my videos, I'm like, "Hey, I didn't come up with this. I'm not like trying to toot my own horn, but I think that's like one of the things that we see with social media is for me, I'm very hard on my sleeve. What you see is what you get. And I always try to be upfront and authentic with people. Like, whatever I say on video is there's literally no different behind closed doors. So I always try to tell that story because I feel like it's definitely important for people to understand the person. And you do a great job of that, understanding who you are as a person, not just as a coach.
Yeah. Well, if anything, however it may come across, what it does is it highlights that programming is something that you're really passionate about and that it means a lot to you. And it's high on your hierarchy of, fitness priorities. And it's probably a bias that you have in coaching. Programming's first, things maybe fall second. And I don't want to make assumptions and put words in your mouth, but Why don't you tell me actually how you got, like, I'm curious how you got your start in coaching, and then how that led into programs and programming being so fundamentally central to, your vision of coaching.
Yeah. So I always try to find like the quickest path to answer this question, but it's a very long answer, unfortunately. But I've been involved in fitness my whole life. My mother was a power lifter. Just grew up as an athlete from a young age, and strength and conditioning was something I got involved with at a very young age. And I had the advantage of having a facility local to me as a kid that was like super high level, like, coaches that went on to be Division I strength and conditioning coaches. So that was kind of my first exposure to strength and conditioning, was from, these really great coaches. And one of my coaches was a West Side barbell guy. And, he introduced me to the conjugate system, and I learned a lot about that through him. Was later, an intern at his facility. And that was kind of my first exposure to actually coaching people. I actually started coaching people just like kind of inadvertently. One of the coach at that facility said, "Hey, I gotta leave for an hour, but I have a group of guys coming in, and all you got to do is give them their program. And if they have any questions, answer their questions." And I was 18 at the time, and I'm like, well, I don't know if I know how to answer those questions. I just felt very like fish out of water. Like, yeah, I knew how to train. I've been doing it for, at this point, almost 10 years, but I wasn't a coach per se. And that was the moment where I gave them their program. And then within a few minutes, they all had questions about their program, and I knew the answers. I didn't have to think about it. And I was like, wow, that's like kind of interesting. I didn't think that I would have even known what to say, but I did. And again, just by virtue of being in the trenches and doing it myself, you learn a lot. So that was kind of my initial coaching experience. I went on to become a trainer, during college. I did exercise science in undergrad and in postgrad. And the support wasn't really great for that. My family was like, "Hey, there's no real career in being a trainer. You're not going to have benefits." My dad really wanted me to go into law enforcement. But for me, it just didn't feel right. And needless to say, I ended up going in the military after college. And the military for me was what got me exposed to CrossFit. Yeah. Because at the time, this is for those of you that are younger, so seem like an eternity ago, but this is like 2006. And if you remember back then, I know you're the same age, almost the same age as me. There was like these two worlds of training. There was like the strength conditioning coaches. CrossFit was really in its infancy. You had .com, and you had a few people like Greg Amundsen and obviously Coach Glassman, but there wasn't really a whole lot that was known about it. And CrossFit was doing this really weird thing. It was kind of turning strength conditioning on its head. And I saw one guy at my gym that was one of the first affiliates in Massachusetts doing CrossFit. And I'm like, what the hell is this guy doing? He's like on the floor dead after every workout. So I remember asking him, like, dude, like, what are you doing? Like, you're doing 30 snatches. This is silly. And he said, "You're not man enough to do it."
Oh boy.
So I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to have to do a workout. So first day, it was like, I did Filthy 50. You want to talk about bad programming. It was Filthy 50 day 1, Fran day 2. I think we did Linda on day 3.
Sounds like .com. That doesn't sound like that.
It probably was. I think we were doing .com back then. So that was my first 3 workouts. And I was like, I think a lot of people immediately like, what? Like, this is a way to still be athletic. It's a way to still be competitive. And I think for me, like, obviously you can push your weights and certainly there's an element of competition there with yourself, but yeah, you attach a time domain to it. Now you have this whole new thing where it's like a sport. And of course, obviously it went on to be what it is today, but that to me opened up my mind to like, there's this whole world and I don't know how to tap into it. And I knew that I was very strong. I was always explosive. But I aerobically was not sound at all. And I always had trouble with endurance tests. And, when I played football in college, I always had trouble with the endurance-based tests. And, again, I didn't know what I didn't know. There was this whole thing called the aerobic system that exists and didn't really know that was the thing that you should train. Right. And every coach at the time was saying, don't go for a jog. You're going to get slower, weaker, and fatter. So again, you get that kind of like imprinting where you think that this, anything endurance related is going to take away from strength and hypertrophy gains.
Yeah, cardio is going to kill your gains. It's just
cardio is going to, and people are still saying that, which is kind of amazing at this point to me. But so CrossFit opened up my mind to this whole new world that I didn't know existed, and it really kind of sent me down a rabbit hole of energy systems. And I really wanted to try to find what I thought was like the holy grail of training, trying to combine both strength training and conditioning and have the two coexist. And
just to pause for a second.
Sure.
CrossFit opens your mind to this. CrossFit's also saying that they're the holy grail of strength and conditioning, combining, basically training all these energy systems in a simple, elegant way. What made you say like, yeah, that doesn't jive actually with me? I think there is a better way. Like I have a better mousetrap that I think I can, come up with for this challenge of training people mixed modally with lots of different energy systems.
Well, I think for me, it was, I did start to see my strength levels decline. I did start to get beat up. And this is very early in the going. I mean, we, fast forward to the years I owned an affiliate, and there was, a lot that had taken place with my own body, as well as just, seeing that I wasn't really able to make the two things coexist the way I wanted to. So that to me was like, I need to learn more about this. So a big part of my post-grad work was in exercise metabolism and really learning more about the aerobic system. But I will say that the turning point for me was after I got out of the military, I got home from a deployment, I opened a CrossFit gym with my wife. And we had the goal of like, we're going to do things. The great thing about CrossFit, you kind of do it however you want. You have autonomy.
Sure.
You don't have to, adhere to one model of training. So we're going to do, I want to combine what I know about strength and conditioning, using a conjugate system in conjunction with CrossFit, with couplets, triplets, chippers, the CrossFit Open, and, have it, allow general people that are training for general fitness to get better and feel better and look better and all those great things we're looking for. But it wasn't until I think 2014, there was a local gym. They made regionals every year, and their athletes were not nearly as strong as ours. And we were always in the running to like make regionals as a team. They made it every year. We would always miss it by like one spot. And I remember like thinking, what I have to like reach out to, as much as I don't want to, just the ego part of it, I have to like reach out to this guy and ask him what they're doing, because his athletes are better. They're in better shape than mine. So I reached out to him and I'm like, man, I don't know what you guys are doing, but you guys crush the Open every year. What are you doing? And he's like, we're doing zone 2. I'm like, zone 2? He's like, yeah, we're doing just steady state aerobic work and as a regular staple in our program. I was like, okay, can you tell me more? He's like, read Ultimate MMA Conditioning by Joel Jamieson. I was like, okay, went online that minute, bought the book. I read the book and I was like, okay, there's a lot here that I am not doing right. And before I started applying it to my gym, I started applying it to myself. And what I saw was not only did I get better at CrossFit, but I did better in the Open than I've ever done. I placed this was in 2018. I placed in the top 50, and I'd never been in the top inside of the top 100. And I was training less. I was tracking my heart rate variability. My scores were improving. My resting heart rate was improving. My strength gains were improving. I'm like, okay, this is crazy. I wouldn't have thought this. So I just saw it, there's this massive shift with my own training that it was like, wow, we're missing a big element here. And when we start including that, that's really when things started to take off for us. Now I went online actually in 2015 with a business called Box Programming. And we were one of the first businesses that allowed gyms to outsource their programming. And it started kind of as like almost a hobby. My wife, always used to joke with me, like, you love programming so much, too bad you can't get paid to do it. And needless to say, that ended up happening just organically. I had like 2 clients and they talked about me in the affiliate owners page in Facebook. And then I had like 10 and then 20. Then 30. And then before the end of the year, I had 100 clients that I was using Google Sheets with, believe it or not.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, this is getting pretty serious. And at that stage, I'd been a gym owner for 5 years. And I'm like, I'm going to sell my gym and do this full time, because I feel like there's really something here that can be pretty amazing. And that's what we did. We sold the gym. We sold our gym in 2 weeks. We had a 200 member gym, and went online full time. 2016. It was right after we had our first child, and obviously things have changed a lot. I've shifted a lot over the years. Box programming, ended up handing that off to a coach that was running it at the time, and I don't run that business anymore. But going more into more individual and more education for coaches at the current day. So
that's crazy. I mean, there's a lot of parallels to our stories. I mean, the time that we kind of came into finding CrossFit, similar timing. I was more or less a power athlete. I was, I played Division I soccer, and people were like, oh, that's pretty anaerobic or pretty aerobic. And I was like, well, I was a goalkeeper, so I love to jump, sprint. That was how I loved to train. Didn't know anything about an aerobic system. I became a goalie because I couldn't run as well as everybody else, and I hated it. Got introduced to CrossFit, thought I was good, struggled tremendously in the open every year. Found a coach that essentially got me to do aerobic work every single day, in some varying capacity. And I learned that there was a system that could be built. And and as I started to see some of the challenges of programming, in the box setting, and trying to please a wide variety of different athletes with one program, I was interested in individual programming. And that kind of led to when I sold my gym in 2016 as well, and sort of went kind of mostly online and tried to start some different individual coaching, models of gyms and so forth. So I want to just get
that's
right
really
into
fun. That's really funny timeline. I obviously remember seeing, I've been to the games, I don't know, 3 or 4 times, as a spectator, but it's really interesting because I think that, and I don't know if this is what you saw, but when I got towards the end of programming for CrossFit gyms, we had about 200 gyms we were working with. COVID really, really cut into that. We lost 75 gyms like in 2 months time. But I got to the place with programming for CrossFit gyms that I just morally and I guess emotionally there were things I just didn't want to subject people to anymore. Mm-hmm. And I didn't care that it was, I used to find ways to trick people to do things that I wanted them to do. But at the end of the day, there were certain things I just didn't want to program anymore. And I'm like, you know what? This doesn't make sense. And the coach I had that was working with me on, I'm like, do you want to take this business over from me and, potentially buy it? Because I just didn't have the motivation to continue to plug things into that training that I just didn't believe in.
Talk to me about what some of those things are. What were some of the things that you've done over the years as a coach that you look back on that programming wise felt like, man, those were mistakes. I wish I could take that back. And what ultimately led you to sort of make a decision to shift your business model and be like, I'm not going to do that anymore, even though it's what the customer is telling me they want.
Yeah. I mean, I think first and foremost, when you're on a schedule for like things like the open, even hero workouts, some hero workouts, you could potentially build a whole month of programming around one hero workout. Having people doing kipping anything, I remember one time I saw clients at my own gym were doing handstand push-ups, kipping handstand push-ups, and they didn't want to come off the wall. I'm sure you've seen this, but they stayed inverted and they rested on their head and they shook their arms out. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking to myself at that time, I remember standing there and I'm like, is this what this person really needs? Do they need to be inverted, all of their weight on their cervical spine, because they don't want to come off the wall for fear of, they might, lose a few, let's say they lose 20 seconds, 30 seconds in that conditioning piece. And I remember it was a guy that, again, just wants to feel good and look good. Mm-hmm. I just remember feeling at that moment thinking, this is not a good use of his time. Not only is it dangerous, but it's not a good use of his time. And I'm not here, just for the record, I'm not here to say CrossFit's dangerous. Anything is dangerous if you do it haphazardly. But at that moment in time, if I had a choice of what that guy should be doing, it wouldn't have been hanging out upside down on his head.
Yeah. How did you grapple with the fact, because I came against some of these same realizations too, where it became so apparent. I was like, wow, this is not what these people need. Um, Yet I was responsible for them having the belief system that this is what they needed. I had perpetuated that for so many years by being an athlete in the sport, by essentially telling them that performance on these workouts is a really good measure of whether you're having success, health, wellness, body composition. Like I drank the Kool-Aid so much that I was like, well, yeah, if you get more handstand push-ups in this workout. So it's like, let's break it simply down. It's like, if you get more handstand push-ups in this workout, you are better, more fit, and you're getting closer to your goals. So staying on your head and shaking your arms out and, resting your body weight on your neck while you catch your breath, I'm responsible for teaching you that that's the thing to do to be better. And to unwind that became too difficult, essentially, as a coach. Like, the culture was, I wasn't the only coach that had perpetuated that, but like the culture around that was so strong that I kind of said, okay, there's a whole group of people that I don't know how to unwind this with, and I don't believe in it as deeply anymore, and I need to shift gears. Did you have to grapple with that? Did you ever take responsibility or feel responsibility for that too?
So one thing, Marcus, that I did a lot of was creating content. And anytime I had a question, I'd write an article. And I wrote some articles for Dr. John Russin's site. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but I wrote a bunch of articles on CrossFit. I wrote a bunch for Elite FTS, and one of them was entitled CrossFit Smarter. That article, a lot of people agreed with. A lot of people. That was like a viral article for me. It's like a 4,000 word article, pretty dense. But a lot of people disagreed, but a lot more people agreed. So I made my stance pretty clear from the beginning when I started doing this, that we are going to do it different. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a set schedule of where we do certain things. Mm-hmm. It's going to be planned. We're going to prioritize accessory work. We're going to prioritize single joint work. We're going to do a lot of GPP, loaded carries, sled pull pushes, band work, high volume band work. And we were doing a lot of things that were very, very custom to the conjugate system style of training, mm-hmm. where we were actually doing dynamic effort. We were using bands and chains. People would say, like, what do people in general fitness need bands and chains for? I'm like, well, bands and chains are a great tool for rate of force development, but they're also a great tool to reduce articular wear and tear. You don't have the same load through full range of motion. So just do the math. If you pull 500 from the floor versus you pull 400 from the floor with 100 pounds of band, there's a lot of benefits there just to reducing wear and tear. So I made my stance very clear through the content. And a lot of articles, hundreds of articles on that stuff to build value in it. So people kind of knew that were different. And I got a lot of pushback because gyms would come to me and say, the workouts aren't hard enough. My clients get this. This is the best thing I ever heard. And I heard this a lot of times. I wish I had a recording of it. My clients feel better. They look better. Their metrics are better. They're actually doing better in the CrossFit Open, but they feel the workouts are not hard enough. And that was kind of the point. I was like, wow, that's, if you could make more money and work less hours, would you do it? That's like kind of what my response was. And, I did take that stance, like kind of the, definitely more of a going against the grain with what CrossFit was. Mm-hmm. And people knew that about me. So even with that, we still had pushback. We still had to, deal with like, hey, we're not doing enough hero workouts. We're not doing enough kipping. We're not doing enough Olympic lifting. We're not doing any Olympic lifting cycles. But because of the fact we did create a lot of content around why we don't do that, it was, I would say it would have probably been a lot harder if I didn't, go the extra lengths with all the content pieces.
That's so, well, it's fascinating that you're one of the few people who came into and adopted some elements of CrossFit with such a prolific and profound background in strength and conditioning prior to it. I think the vast majority of people in the strength and conditioning community that saw CrossFit come up really pushed away and were like, we're not going to take any part in this. Mm-hmm. So kudos to you for being open-minded enough to be like, hey, there's something here. And I think you felt that because you experienced it. And that's a huge part for me, where it was like, I didn't have the coaching experience that you had when I first found CrossFit. I had a lot of experience as an athlete the Division I NCAA, standard strength conditioning model. I got to go through as an athlete myself. I was fortunate to get exposure to some Charles Poliquin methods earlier, like in my teens. That was kind of how I was lifting towards the end of high school. And all of it, when I experienced it, there was some value there. There was value to the NCAA Division I method. There was tons of value in Charles, German body composition methods. And then when someone said, "Hey, come do CrossFit," I was like, "I want to do anything." Sure. I felt something there. I was like, wow, I've done a lot of athletic stuff in my life. This is unique. So kudos to you for being open to adopting it, but also to holding really soundly to the principles that you learned prior to getting in and be like, you know what, I'm going to take a hard stance here where I'm looking out for the wellness of my clients while also trying to adopt new principles. And that's sort of, ultimately where I arrived too as a coach was like, and this is kind of how I heard you say something in one of your reviews, which is like this juxtaposition of like efficacy and having fun, or giving people what they need versus giving people what they want. You said, I think, sometimes you need to trade some fun for effectiveness, or effectiveness for some fun. Talk to me about what does that mean? First off, like what in your experience coaching, what do people want? What's fun? And then what do people need and what's effective? If you could bucket that in, a few big rocks for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you think about like, if we just did straight sets, one exercise at a time, we've rested 2 to 3 minutes between sets. In theory, someone might get better results, right? I mean, there's some supported research on that now. And a lot of people are coming out that, hey, don't do supersets, because people are like, well, if you do push-pull, then you're resting. It's like, well, the nervous system doesn't fully recover. So there is certainly that component to it. And I think that there is a time and a place for that. I think if we're going to squat heavy, it's the first movement of the day. Let's just squat heavy, right? Let's build to a 5 RM or whatever the parameters are for that day. And let's rest. Let's rest long between the sets. But if you're going to do your whole session like that, someone that's very type A, people like us, we're going to get bored quick, right? So there is what I feel to be, again, kind of that sweet spot. Do we utilize supersets? Do we utilize giant sets, circuits? I would say yes, unequivocal. I utilize that in all my programming, because I do feel that, obviously the efficiency of it, the feel, just the psychological advantage of it, the training density aspect of it. So we can certainly, adhere to a textbook, or we can adhere to what we know actually works more in the trenches. And that's where I feel like the disconnect is that a lot of people are really study heavy these days, and studies are great. And they're certainly a guide, but they're not the end all be all. And I'll tell you right now, if I followed a study for all of my programs, there'd be basically I've got 1,000 people training with me right now on my training subscriptions on Train Heroic. And, there'd be no one training on them, because they're all people like me and you. They want to feel like they're doing some work. Of course, there's a lot of things that we can potentially feel in a training session. There's a lot of different energy demands across a week of training. So knowing that, there is certainly a balance. And I do think like one of the things I hate is like 30 to 40 minutes of cardio. What does that mean? What does that mean as far as the conditioning? And I love the conditioning piece that you did. It actually looks like, I think I said, I'm like, this is exactly like what I would program on this day. A combination of cyclical, a combination of body weight, maybe some light kettlebell, where, if you think about the aerobic system, if you drive blood pressure up at all, you're going to blunt some of the adaptations. I mean, there is more constriction that takes place when we drive up blood pressure. So ideally, we could just do cyclical, but it's not fun to do 60 minutes of cyclical. Tell me someone that wants to go get on a bike and go for 60 minutes. I don't want to do it. So I look at it as, if I don't want to do it, then I'm not willing to make someone else do it. Mm-hmm. And I will use cyclical. That's a good example. I will combine other elements, just like you did in that conditioning piece on that Wednesday session. It was a combination of things. And the value of that is, yes, is it the same effect as just doing cyclical? Maybe not, but Is the end result, is it going to be noticeable? I would say it's probably negligible, and it's more fun. I look at the compliance scores too on like Train Heroic. I can see compliance scores. I've actually did an experiment. I gave people the option on, it was a zone 2 day. I gave them the option and I told them what they could do. And I looked at the compliance on that day versus like other days where it was more set.
Yep.
And the days it was more set, the compliance was double what it was on the days it was not. So I don't know if people are actually just not logging it or whatever, but I do think that there's some value into putting the same attention in detail into the conditioning as you do your strength work. Obviously, we're kind of getting off on another topic now, but that's a good example.
But so far I've heard you say, it's like looking at how to make something more fun, where do we add more, and maybe this is actually separate. We'll talk about this in a moment, but look, somebody comes in and does strength work. Doing straight sets might have the most efficacy and value, but adding in supersets or combining movements or perhaps altering rest periods, it's like, hey, you don't have to do every single working set and then rest 2 to 3 minutes. And then specifically, with our experience with CrossFit, it's recognizing that energy system work can be done with different implements. You don't have to just sit on a bike or sit on a rowing machine. You can sit on a rowing machine, you can get off, you can do things like step ups, lunges, push-ups, planks, carries, you name it. And you can create a similar feeling that, or a similar outcome, but the experience of doing it is just a heck of a lot different and a lot more enjoyable for a good number of people. And that to me was what I carried with me away from my CrossFit experience as a coach, was like, there are so many thousands of ways that we can approach the same fundamental goals within strength and conditioning. I want to build strength. Well, you could do it this way. You could do it that way. You could do it that way. We just want to get people strong. And I don't want them to be stuck and married to just doing it one way forever, because that gets super boring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I think that, one of the things that you do so well is presenting this stuff in a way that is, I mean, I see some of your posts. I'm like, oh man, I want to go do that workout. That looks killer. I mean, your program looks, I will say, I look at your program, look at mine. Your program looks like it's more fun than mine. And, obviously you've got elements too, where you are just focusing on strength work and just doing one exercise and resting. So I do think that, if you subject people, the CrossFit crowd trying to do like just straight sets of one exercise, rest 2 to 3 minutes, I mean, forget about it. It's just not going to work, Yeah.
And we've seen that within our own community. It's like the people who are, as maybe one of the biases I had was towards variation. I learned the vast majority of my strength and conditioning career started in a chaotic environment of CrossFit, right? So it didn't start in a, these are the fundamentals, this is what you stick to. And so I basically had to pare my programming bias pare it down from chaos to structure. And along the way, it's gotten more structured, less chaotic. And so somebody who kind of met me 7 years ago, they were still in the slightly chaotic realm of, Marcus Philly functional bodybuilding, and they loved it. And they're still with me because that really, spoke to them. And as they see more structure come in, more straight sets, more 2 to 3 minute rest periods that have a high amount of efficacy, they're like, this is getting a little kind of boring for me. I kind of miss the old days, which is just interesting, because it's like we're trying to coach a lot of different people with a lot of different personality types. And it makes me, I had a question here that I want to ask now, because I think it's appropriate. It's like, one of the stumbling blocks people have is now there's so many options out there. There's so many programs, and they kind of get into this like analysis paralysis, like which is the best program for me? And so what kind of advice do you have for listeners about how to pick the right program for them? Like how would you tell, your cousin who's like, hey, I'm looking to get on a program. What are the things I should be looking for?
That's a great question. I think that's one of the reasons that I started doing these program reviews, and man, some of the stuff I've seen is just purely negligent, and it has actually made me very angry, because I know people like you, people like me are doing this for specific reasons. And it is, we genuinely care about people. And when I see people doing things just completely haphazard and just all over the place, it's kind of sad. So I think it's definitely a very tough question to answer. What do you use to gauge whether or not something is the right program? And like you said, there's so many options. Certainly there's an element of paralysis by analysis, but I think that the good thing is that you can do almost a trial of anything, right? Like you give people a 14-day trial, which is awesome. We do a 7-day trial for both our subscriptions. And I think people intuitively know. Like for me, I intuitively know. This past year, I intuitively felt like I wanted to train full body exclusively. And I had never felt like that before in my life. I had trained full body, here and there, back and forth. I would do conjugate for 9 months, full body for 3. But this past year, like right before I turned 40, I'm like, I just feel like I want to train full body forever now, at least until into the foreseeable future. So I think people are intuitive, even without having necessarily like any formal education or understanding in terms of like program design.
And so hold on. Sorry, I just want to jump in. Your intuition guides you towards things that you have a broader view of fitness. And so you can say like, I just have this feeling I want to train full body. Somebody who's maybe not as experienced, like they know they just want to get in shape. Like they don't know how different types of training feel. So I don't mean to cut you off, but for that person too, because I'm thinking really about our listener and somebody who's like, I'm on the Look Good, Move Well podcast because I want to look good and move well. Mm-hmm. And I don't have, I've done F45 and I have been to a CrossFit class, but I don't know anything else about fitness. How do I gauge what's right for me inside of a program? But I don't disagree that intuition's good. It's more like they probably have to show up and try this thing. They don't even know that it's called full body. They're just like, oh, this felt good. Like, so what is feeling good, or what intuitively comes up for you when you do something that feels right?
Well, I think that, another thing too is like just, people putting out more, like people like yourself, putting out more education about markers of like good training. Like, people use soreness, they use fatigue as a marker of good training. And we know that that's not, if you want to think about actual looking at scientific evidence, soreness can actually take away from hypertrophy, excessive soreness, that is. So I think that, again, that's a really tough question to answer. Where would I send someone if they just said, hey, where do I go? What would be like the ground, like the foundation of that? I mean, I would certainly look at the background of that person. And I think that, their physique or even their athletic accomplishments might not be the thing. Do they actually have anything that would speak to having some expertise behind writing a program, especially for the masses, which, as you and I both know, is very different than an individual program versus program for the masses. There's a lot of things that we don't know when we're programming for thousands of people as opposed to one-on-one. So I'm actually not sure. I'm not sure what I would tell someone. I'm very lucky. I think you might be in the same boat where a lot of the people that come to me have like 10 years of experience. So they've been in the trenches, they've done it. They've done like the linear cycles. They've done, just go down a list of like popular training programs, and they've gotten to a point where they're like, okay, I need to train more sustainably. I need to feel good outside of the training. So I can't be like hobbling around when I'm playing with my kids, or even worse, like I'm on the couch and I can't play with my kids because my back and my shoulders are killing me. Mm-hmm. So I think that those are certainly markers, but when someone has that level of experience where they've been training for a decade, it's certainly a little bit more, it's a little easier for them to be more intuitive. Now, someone that's been training a year, I don't know how I would advise them. I'd probably say, go find a good trainer to teach you how to squat, hinge, lunge, push, pull, carry.
Yeah. And which I think is great advice. Not everybody is going to take that advice. And, certainly in a digital age of fitness, people want maybe it's a little safe, feels a little safer. It's like, hey, let me just try something on my own before I go, rather invest a bunch or show up to a class or do something where I have to be in person, be vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
But I like what you did say. It's like you threw out a couple good things to think about. Maybe these are take homes. Tell me if you agree. Is, you know, looking at a program, it's the outcomes of the program, really should speak to you in the context of your life. It's not just about looking, better. It's like there's a lot of programs that show, hey, look at these transformations, but
Mm-hmm.
how do you feel on the, day to day going through life? And I know that that's probably, I mean, that's certainly something that we try and speak to a lot, which is, focusing on, for lack of a better term, it's like we talk about longevity, or kind of as a catch-all of like, is this supporting each day, each week, each month, each year, and can we do that? And is the program, at least in the marketing or at least in the language, and then in your experience of it, is this making you feel like, oh my gosh, this is making me feel younger, this is making me feel good, or is this making me feel like crap? um, and that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, it's like nobody wants to have the longevity program that makes them not look good. Like,
Mm-hmm.
they're like, hey, this is a great, like, I've seen, people who train, they're like, I'm living till I'm 100 and I do just enough to like get by. And I'm like, but I want to get in there and get after. Like, I want to feel like I'm expending myself. So it's like longevity without sacrificing, aesthetics or performance. Like, how do you have both inside of a training program?
Mm-hmm.
How do you actually think about that as you program for others and you coach people? It's like, many people want to look better naked. They want to see aesthetic changes. They want to be strong. And you want to provide them with a program that can do that. How do you avoid, or how do you do that without sacrificing the longevity aspect? And what do you kind of consider like longevity pieces to training and program design?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess the sad part of it is it's not super sexy. It's not very marketable. As you know, like zone 2 conditioning is not super sexy. It's probably not going to get likes, but it is super, super important. So I don't write a program that does not have aerobic conditioning in it. On the other end of the spectrum, our strength training and our hypertrophy work, or even power work, there's a big element of developing the foundational movement patterns, our squat, our hinge, our lunge, our push, our pull, our carry. And again, it's basics, right? Like everything with program design that I talk about in those reviews is basic stuff: exercise order, exercise selection, sets, reps, and rest intervals, basic stuff. And it doesn't have to be incredibly varied or nuanced to have a big bang for the buck. And I think that when people do those things very well, and of course you can progress all of those variations over time very easily, then that's when we start seeing, kind of that continuum of performance, body composition in conjunction with the longevity piece, how they feel, what are their energy levels like outside of the gym? Can they play with their kids? For me, that's just a non-negotiable thing. My life outside of the gym has to improve. And that's the way I feel about all my programs. If you're, I always tell this to a lot of the coaches I mentor is, what is the client's energy levels? How do they feel outside of the gym? And, don't just look at the transformation 90 days. Let's think about years down the road. I mean, you have the ability to add years to someone's life, to add quality to their life, their ability to play with their grandkids down the road. Those are the things that I think about. So I think that when you prioritize that low hanging fruit, if you will, your foundational movement patterns, your aerobic system, that's when we start seeing just a really big carryover to all things, whether it be, improving performance and being able to still push it in those sessions, as well as, hey, I want to go for a hike, or, hey, I want to play with my kids, and I'm not going to be, wincing in pain because the training I just did kicked my butt more than it should have. Right.
Sure.
So those
what are some of those, because I hear that in your reviews often, and maybe we're sort of like getting at what fundamentally, bothers you when you see things inside of programs. What are the biggest or the most common mistakes? And it sounds like, from having listened to some of your reviews, like, hey, I don't like what's in here because I believe this is unnecessary. It's going to beat you down, and it's ultimately not leading to a long, healthy, happy life. Is that,
Mhm.
I mean, is that a, not to just like
Yeah.
summarize it so simply, but does that resonate with you?
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of things that are potentially being done wrong. Again, we're living in a world that the marker of success is like doing more. And doing more, there's a point of diminishing returns. If it was just about doing more, everyone would look like you. Right? It'd be easy to look like you, but that it's not. There's a lot of other things. You have to manage stress. You have to do well outside of the gym. You have to manage your nutrition, your sleep, all those great things. So it's a lot more than just the training. And, when you put people in positions where they're A, vulnerable, B, just an inordinate amount of volume to maybe tissues that are already tight. You order, I think one thing that just comes to mind, I saw one session from a very popular guy that was like 200 plus reps of abdominal work before we squatted and benched heavy. I'm like, I don't understand this. Why would you make someone do 100 GHD sit-ups and then 100 of this and then whatever else? I think there was some isometric work in there before you did this. I mean, you can do some activation and you could do 3 sets of 8 to 10 for activation. You don't need to annihilate someone before they do the main like crux of that day. So those are things that to me that just don't make sense. We know that like people are chronically stressed out. So we use aerobic training to help bring them out of fight or flight. We know B, that people tend to be weak in the posterior chain. Most people are sitting, they're on their iPhones, and they're in these internally rotated adduction positions. So we want to, in essence, pull them out of that more external rotation, abduction. So there are certain strategies we can use for that. We can target the upper back complex. We can drive a lot of volume into these tissues that are weaker. And I mean, those two things alone, I mean, we're talking big changes, low hanging fruit there for just about anyone. And that's, again, just kind of a blanket statement across. If I had to, run into 10 people on the street right now, I would say out of 10, eight of them would do well with that strategy.
So those are I mean, yes, we are living in a world where people want to do more and more is better, or there's the belief that more is better. In training, we know that isn't true. But what are the things that you believe everybody could be doing more of? Like, if you could give me what are 3 areas of training you're like, yeah, I don't really see there's no upper limit to how much of this is good for you. Go ham, because people want to do more, and it's like, I'm going to give you the green light to do as much of this as you want, and it could be anything from mobility to whatever you say comes out. But what would those things be, or do you have a few?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'd say zone 2, like mixed cyclical work that, the stuff that you were doing on that Wednesday session, I think would be something that it's tough to overdo. I mean, I think for most people, if you can get in 2 to 3 hours a week of that, you're in pretty good shape. I mean, if you're coming from doing 0, then obviously going to 30 minutes will make a dent, but at some point you probably want to, inch that up over time. So zone 2 aerobic work. And again, biasing more cyclical pieces, your air runner, your rower, your bike, your ski erg, anything you have access to at your commercial gym, elliptical, step mill, whatever.
And how do you coach people to monitor their zone 2 efforts? Are you big on heart rate stuff? Do you talk more conversational pace? So what is the cue? Because I think people are hearing more and more about zone 2, and they're not really sure what that even means. They might have a whoop and they're like, well, my whoop said I wasn't in zone 2, and am I even in zone 2? So how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I think the key element is it being conversational, sustainable, something you could foreseeably do for hours on end. Not that you're going to do it for hours on end, but if you had to sustain it for a longer duration, that's kind of the thing that I say too. Like if everyone's like, well, you can just do some kettlebell work. Well, can you swing a kettlebell for an hour straight? Probably not. So, I think,
but you could swing it 10 times and then get back on the bike for 30 seconds and then swing it 10 times kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. So keeping it conversational. I always tell people, like, I try to, instead of getting into, because people will overanalyze heart rate too. So they'll they'll like, oh, well, I heard of the Maffetone method's 180 minus your age, or do I do 220 minus my age and then 60 to 70% of that? Or, what about this, and that? It's like, okay, I just want it to be easy.
Yeah.
Right. So it should be easy. And again, for a former CrossFitter, that's very hard to do. Mm-hmm. They feel like it's too easy. It's not going to do anything. Right. So I try to give them a little bit more about why it needs to be easy in terms of just things like cardiac output, in terms of, obviously, delivering nutrients and oxygen to working tissues. So those are certainly important aspects of it. Again, just trying to keep it very simple and not too sciencey. Yep. But if it's easy, it's conversational, then you're probably doing it right. And then you want to get more granular, you certainly can. And you could track heart rate. You could use a chest strap. I use a Garmin watch. You do anything seated, it changes. It goes down to about 10, 15 beats per minute. If you do a bike, I get on the Air Runner, I go up 10 to 15 beats pretty easily. So, you got to obviously factor that in. But again, that's another element that I kind of don't want people to overanalyze. So really just the key tenet is, keeping it conversational. And as they get more trained, they're more experienced. A lot of those people will start to, just by virtue of doing it longer, they want to actually track their heart rate and see some things like, their HRV score and how that plays out with those things. So that can certainly come, but I think at some point, it might make sense to get a little bit more technical with it.
Just to stay, I want to stay on this for a little longer. I do want to hear if there are other areas of training that you think people could all do more of without, ruining themselves and crushing their recovery. But with this zone 2 training coming into the conversation so much more these days, it's interesting because it seems like, if I'm an outsider listening, it was like, well, for years we all did cardio, and then we were told cardio sucks and we got to strength train. And then we all got into strength training, which led into high intensity fitness. And now we're being told to stop doing that. We got to get back to doing more cardio. It sort of seems like there's this pendulum swing that's just going back and forth. It's like cardio used to be poo-pooed, like you're not doing anything good for you. You got to lift weights. And now we're being told, like, if you're not doing cardio, you're going to die, you're dying a slow death. So how do you give people context and tell, like, how do you navigate that conversation and sort of educate people on the benefits, or why was cardio for years being said, like, this is not what's right for you? What were people missing? Go ahead, take it.
You can easily point to, if you wanted to, and it's funny, we had some studies come out. There's some studies more recently that came out and kind of confirmed what we knew anecdotally as far as the kind of the dose in terms of duration, how much total duration throughout the week, how that relates to what percentage of VO2 max. So you can point to some studies in terms of recovery. You can point to some studies, but I think that more of just like kind of the basic physiology of it, why it can improve recovery between sessions, how it has the effect on actually helping you go into that next strength session better recovered and feeling better and able to push harder. Those things are things that people will feel, right? I mean, they'll feel that, and the results speak for themselves. I always say, like, results are king. So if the results we're trending in the right direction, then we know things are good. But more specifically, I think we need to look at resting heart rate. And that's something I again, on a program for the masses, tough to do. You can look up. Anyone can go on Google right now and Google average resting heart rate. For guys, it's like mid 60s. Ladies, like high 60s, low 70s. We can look to that. And I've seen plenty of people have super, super high resting heart rates. And is it because their conditioning is so bad? Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just being driven up just kind of artificially by the environment they're in. Maybe they're in law enforcement and they're super stressed out, or they have a major life change. So we can look at things like the resting heart rate. We can look at, go deeper with heart rate variability scores, which there's some fantastic programs that assess that very well. And those are things that are a little bit more tangible. Heart rate variability, I use Morpheus from Joel Jamieson, which I think who's, one of the pioneers of HRV. And, one of the things that you can remove is sometimes people, their bodies will lie and they'll say, oh, I'm feeling good today. But the HRV score will come back, they're in the red. And it's like, maybe today I shouldn't push it because HRV said I'm not in a good state in terms of my nervous system. So that is a great way to remove someone's mindset, their own biases, where they say, oh, I'm going to push it today. I'm going to go for that max deadlift. And I don't care, the HRV score. And usually what I find is I've seen a lot of people get hurt, and not to laugh about it, but the HRV score says you're in the red and you're still pushing it. And usually, and I've been guilty of this myself, is feeling good, but the HRV score says something else, and then going to push it. Those are actually, it's funny, I can count on my hand in the last 5 years how many times I've got hurt. 2 times it was when I was in the red, and I still pushed it because I felt great in the session. I feel strong today. Those days your weights are just feeling light. And that was one of those days for me. And I think that one thing that you might not know with HRV is that sometimes there's residual effects. It takes a little bit longer to kind of kick in. And I think that is a great way to remove that subjectivity where people are like, feel good, I'm going to push it today. Well, HRV said this, so maybe you shouldn't push it. So especially for the ex-CrossFitter that's very type A, it's a great way to get them to buy into, okay, you can't push 100% every day. You got to, kind of down regulate your intensity sometimes. And, if your resting heart rate's through the roof, it's much higher than average, then what do we need to do to potentially get that down? Maybe we need to bias more conditioning, which a lot of people don't want to hear. But do you want to live longer, or do you want to train for strength more? It's, that question usually comes up. I have a client I work with one-on-one right now who has a super high resting heart rate, and we've been working on driving it down. And, the programming is kind of basic. I mean, we bias more aerobic conditioning as opposed to strength training. And yes, the guy wants to look good and he wants to lose weight, but there's bigger things at play right now for him. And I'm more concerned with him being here for a long time than I am how he looks in the next 90 days.
Wow. Well, thanks for going a little deeper on that. And get back to that last question. What other areas do you think people have room to sort of add more without breaking themselves down?
There's a few other things. Some of them are a little more specific. I think sled drags are one of the best. It's one of the best strength and conditioning tools known to man. You can use the sled for the upper body, the lower body. There's no axial loading. It can be used for aerobic if you get the right surface and the sled's light enough, and you can go for 30 minutes at a pop. So I've used sleds a lot in my career. I've used them with a lot of people I've trained. I've trained a lot of marathon runners. We've used sleds quite a bit. You can actually kind of train the specificity of an endurance event with a sled drag, a longer duration sled drag, which is cool. That's one I always recommend. I have a post. It's like, just buy the effing sled, because, for $120 or whatever they are right now, it's such a great return on investment with that. So I think if you wanted to buy a sled and you have somewhere where you could potentially pull the sled, there's not really a whole lot you can't do with a drag sled. The other thing would be, band work. Band work is a phenomenal tool to improve the elasticity of tendons. It improves store kinetic energy in tendons. So it has a component of explosiveness via the series elastic component. Anyone could do band work. It's very easy to teach. Banded pull aparts, banded push downs, banded leg curls, banded pull throughs. You can accumulate a lot of volume of those pretty quickly because you don't have full tension through full range of motion. So that one is one that is still a staple. We used to do that a lot at the CrossFit gyms I worked with, because again, the learning curve is basically nothing. I mean, it's so easy to teach, as opposed to a snatch. There's obviously a big learning curve. So I'd rather people do a lot of band work to end the day, because it's just so easy to accumulate volume and do correctly. So that's probably another one. I don't think out of those three things, you really can't overdo those. Now, is more better? I think for band work, at Westside Barbell, they'll accumulate thousands of reps of band work per week. I think you need to do that. I've done that personally. I haven't seen a distinct benefit from doing 1,000 reps versus doing a couple hundred reps. So, and there are other things that, you could apply that same logic to. A reverse hyper is another great tool that not everyone has access to, but it has a ton of great benefits that you can accumulate a ton of volume with and not have it impact your other training.
Well, I'm certainly, I agree with everything you said. I haven't put some of those into practice in a long time, and it kind of makes me think gosh, there used to just be bands attached to poles and bars all over the gym all the time and just get reps in when you walk past them. Or, someone listening who goes to a commercial gym, and they do a training program of mine, or they do a training program of yours, and they don't have a band in their bag. It's such like a great tool to just throw in there. And, hey, you want to add in a little bit of work at the end of your training. Maybe you want a little bit more warm up and more prep. Such a good tool to have. The sled thing, it's like, not everybody has the ability to have a good surface to push a sled on. Not all gyms have surfaces for sleds, or even they have access to sleds. But it is such a good tool if you do have it. And if you go to a gym with a sled, it's oftentimes not being used at all. It's the thing that's just sitting there. We were in, Arlington, Upper Arlington, in Boston area over the summer, and we went to a Gold's Gym for a couple of weeks while we were there, and they had this awesome turf area, a couple sleds. Nobody touched them. I was like, man, this is like gold sitting in this facility, and nobody even knows that it's here, or maybe what to do with it. It's like, well, you don't need to do anything special. Just put a little light load on it, push it and pull it for 10 minutes, and add that as your conditioning work at the beginning or the end. Okay.
Yeah,
well,
I agree. That's it. I mean, those are phenomenal tools. The band work, you could use it for activation at the beginning. You don't have to go ham on the volume. You can, again, 3 sets of 8 to 10. People demonize 3 sets of 10. I actually really like that rep scheme. It's a great rep scheme for both strength and hypertrophy. And, if you do it right, it's a great rep scheme. But needless to say, I think band work is one of those tools. I usually tell people, like, we'll put in, banded leg curls, banded push downs, banded pull aparts. And maybe it'll be usually like 2 or 3 variations. And it'll be like accumulate 100 reps anytime during the day. And a lot of people, I'm sure it's probably the same for you. A lot of people have home gyms now. And it's like, hey, knock out 100 banded push downs. And they're not going to be sore because, again, with bands, as opposed to like a cable push down, people say, well, I'll just do cable. Well, cable, you're getting tension through full range of motion. So there's certainly a component of getting more delayed onset muscle soreness, more muscle damage. So I like the band because you're not getting tension through full range of motion. And of course, because you can accumulate very, very high volume, you get added benefits, adaptations in terms of tendons. So yeah, just a phenomenal tool that you can do a lot with.
Cool. Okay. Well, to kind of close things out, you have reviewed a ton of programs. You've written a ton of programs. You have a programming hat and lens that you look through that is, backed by 2 decades of experience of coaching, plus another decade of actual training experience where you were the athlete and learning. What if, for people who are listening, who are like still writing their own programs for themselves, or they're coaches and they're writing programs for others, give me like your top 1 to 2 biggest missed opportunities, and how people can go about, making corrections or improving the programs that they're writing.
So for me, it's the greatest good for the greatest number. And this is what I did things with CrossFit programming. I used to always tell people, if you had someone walk in, do you think you could show them how to push a sled in 1 second? And they say yes. And I said, well, do you think you can show them how to do a snatch in 1 second? Well, no. So I think of things like that. So what has the biggest benefit for the most amount of people? So we're thinking about training splits. Full body split will have the biggest bang for the buck for the most people. It doesn't require a ton of training frequency. It doesn't require a ton of experience. If you do have a ton of experience, it can work well for you too. And it hits all the foundational movement patterns, guaranteed, right? You hit our pull, we hit our push, we hit our carry, we hit our squat, our single leg, our hinge. Perfect. Okay. And you can do that 3 days a week and get phenomenal. You can do it 2 days a week and get phenomenal results. The other thing is that, as I mentioned, people are stressed out. Stress levels are not going down. They're going up, and we need to be mindful of that. And, sometimes the best strategy is reducing intensity, doing less, addition by subtraction. So doing some conditioning, some easy conditioning. Some days you're not feeling it. Those are the days, go do some aerobic conditioning. So if I was just able to say like, hey, this is what I would do like just a random person, 2 days of full body strength work where you do basically 1 lower body movement and an upper push and an upper pull. And if you wanted to, you could do 2 lower body movements, let's say a hinge and a squat or a single leg. I would do that 2 days a week. And then the other 2 days, I would do some easy, steady state, cyclical, go to the gym, go through multiple things. So you keep it interesting. You do 10 minutes at the elliptical, 10 minutes at the treadmill, 10 minutes on the rower, so on and so forth. Choose as many pieces you want. Go for up to an hour if you want to. And that would be kind of it. And now from the coach perspective, again, it's not super sexy. It's not going to be great for likes, but the basics are what win. And these programs I'm looking at that have thousands upon thousands of people using them are missing the boat on the basics. Like I saw a program that didn't do any upper back work, not one exercise for the upper back. How are you kidding me? Mm-hmm. I don't even understand that. Like, how can you not do that? Well, if you're not doing that, then obviously there's some disconnect here because we have massive low-hanging fruit with the upper back complex. Yeah. So if you just follow that strategy I mentioned, you're going to hit that. Even if you don't have an exercise science degree or any background in programming, you're going to hit that if you just follow the foundational movement patterns. And again, that's your squat, your hinge, your lunge, your push, your pull. And a carry, you could do abdominal work in place of a carry if you can't do loaded carries. But that's kind of it in a nutshell.
It's amazing that somebody with your extensive background, and you've gone down rabbit holes of nuance and detail, and I'm sure you've written highly sophisticated programs for very specific outcomes. You've seen it all. And, at the end of the day, it's like the fundamentals, the basics, are what is going to work for most people. And you don't have to get super complicated and super sexy. And maybe that's like a kind of a cautionary tale to people. It's like the more sexiness and the more flashiness that you see out there in a training program, possibly that it's getting further away from what you need. And I know we've already discussed like the efficacy for fun. I know that's part of the kind of like challenge that we have as coaches. It's like, I want to give you just the most simple, basic thing, because that's really what's most effective for you. But then if you don't do it, it's not that effective. So we got to add in a little bit of sexiness. We got to add in a little bit of variety, a little bit of fun. That's what's going to get you to keep coming back. How do I make 60 minutes of zone 2 cardio, fun for you? I'm going to do it in these 10 different ways. How do I make, a full body resistance training program fun? I'm going to change the movements, more frequently than I would like. I'd prefer that you just do Bulgarian split squats for the next 12 weeks, but you might get bored of that. So let's throw in some drop lunges. Let's throw in some curtsies. Let's throw in something else. Let's make it, more fun and varied. So I think there's a lot of alignment and a lot of agreement on those things. And I still appreciate, the lens that you look through when you review a program. You review our program, you looked at Persist Perform, and you poke some holes at, hey, exercise selection or order of sets. I would prefer to do it this way because this is the outcome that you get. Every coach should have a reason behind the choices that they're making. If I looked at your programs or if I look at somebody else's, I'm looking through I have my own bias, and I'm wondering, okay, well, why are you making that choice? But it's good information, great information that you're putting out there. I appreciate you doing it. What, as kind of a last thing, what are some of your other favorite training resources online if people want to go and learn a little bit more about programming? These could be online or textbooks. What are your top go-tos?
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe before we get to that, I would love to talk to you maybe a little bit about your program, because this is the first time I actually had 2 other people reach out that I reviewed the programs, and they were approved programs. No one has reached out that I didn't approve. But I would love to know a little bit more about your program in terms of, you did like a 3 to 4 round conditioning piece before your strength piece. And again, I remember saying in my video, like, I'm not sure. Maybe there's something here that, that I can learn. I will tell you guys, anyone listening, I do not know it all. I am always willing to learn. And I think, the ability to be honest and look at things, like you said, your programs when you first started, are not the way they are now. And I think that anyone's programs a year ago, my programs a year ago are in the trash. We're not using those programs because what I do today is better than what I did a year ago. And then a year from now, same thing. And that's kind of how I think it should be. So I'd love to know maybe a little more about, obviously this is your podcast, but I'd love to know more about
Sure.
your program. Yeah. Cause it's like I said, a very well designed, and it looked like a lot of fun. I was looking at it like, man, I kind of, want to hop on board with this myself.
Well, that I appreciate that. I'll take that as a compliment. Yeah, I mean, a couple of the things that in your review, and we'll be sure to link that review in the show notes. People want to go and listen to it. I encourage them to. We have an online training subscription, and on that subscription, there's 5 training tracks that we have. So there's really like.
By the way, I was subscribed and I did pay.
Oh,
I
legit.
did your trial, but I did subscribe and pay for your subscription.
Right.
I'm not, those people.
No, it's okay. I mean,
stuff.
I knew you were.
Yeah.
I knew you were using the trial. At least
Yeah.
you mentioned that, and but the track that you were reviewing was our Perform track, which is sort of, as I said, like where people came from, our audience from years and years ago. These were like the loyal followers that came from my CrossFit, years, and how I trained for CrossFit for years. Then transitioning out of CrossFit and be like, what elements of this do I want to maintain inside of my functional bodybuilding, look good, move well training in the future? As you know, like as a competitor in CrossFit, we really didn't have a bias towards, any one
quality.
One quality, one fitness characteristic. So it's like, today is a conditioning bias day, but we still are going to do strength work. And so while on the one hand, there's tons of merit to say, like, do your big compound lift first when you're fresh, ready, energized, you're not fatigued, you put yourself in the safest, best opportunity to like, express power and strength. That wasn't how things showed up for us in application when we were doing CrossFit. Furthermore, in my experience from doing so much conditioning work over the years and really turning, as my skill and my fitness improved, what was a warm-up or a challenging conditioning piece became something that felt very much like zone 2, a zone 2 effort. I could mix skills and do or a zone 3 or something that was like moderate conditioning pace. And on paper, it's like, wow, it looks like it could be a super hard conditioning piece. Like I would be gassed after that, or maybe somebody would be gassed and then they want to go do something complex like, a thruster or heavy clean or something like that. Maybe not the smartest thing. But what I found and experienced through coaching others and doing this myself was that, people were not warming up enough and were not actually getting their systems alive. Like they didn't breathe enough. They didn't sweat enough. They didn't move enough. They didn't get enough blood flow to their extremities prior to lifting. And so even like a thoughtful warm up where they did, 5 to 10 minutes of a mixture of cyclical cardio and dynamic stretches, or maybe some like small muscle activation work. Then it's like, okay, now you're ready to go squat. Like they've been on their butt for 12 hours that day or 8 hours. And that just wasn't sufficient. So it's like, and then to write in a 30-minute warm up for them, which is actually what they needed to like unglue their bodies, it didn't make sense. So, we found time and time again, it's like people did some conditioning work at the beginning of their session. They go and do their resistance training. They're executing better lifts. They're actually lifting higher percentages with better technique. Was that true for 100% of people? No. Some people go and they do the conditioning work first. They switch on the, 3, 2, 1, go. They go crazy hard. They don't know how to pace themselves. They're gassed. And then they go and try and do front squats. They're like, man, I can't even hit like 70% today on my front squat. So it wasn't a perfect situation, but it was for this particular type of program where people are like, I don't have one bias towards strength is the most important aspect, and I have to bias it towards the beginning of my training. It's like, no, I'm doing conditioning first, and then I'm going to do strength, work or power work after that, with a full admission that, hey, you're not going to potentially get the most out of this, but you might be surprised at how much you do get out of it. And in many instances, people are getting more out of it than they ever did before. They're like, damn, it's the crazy thing you see at the CrossFit Games where it's like people are PRing their, whatever on an EMOM ladder, doing deadlifts or cleans or whatever. It's like, as they actually got into the sets and reps, they warmed themselves up and their brains got connected to what they were doing. It's like, oh, they were able to lift, lift more. Does this work for like, people that are elite in strength and power? No, it doesn't. But that's not the audience that we have. So yeah. And plus it's like touching in that like little variety, fun, part of the coaching equation. Somebody who's comes in, it's like, I love the conditioning part. They're always waiting to do at the end of training. Like, okay, when are we going to be done with all this other strength work? Cause I really want to get to the conditioning. It's like, well, here you go. It's the first part of training. Get your willies, get your willies out. Now you've like scratched that itch and they're like, okay, cool. I'm here. I'm anchored into training. I'm like, yeah, let's focus on doing some accessory work now. Let's focus on doing some unilateral training. Whereas if that came before their conditioning work, they're like, how do I get through this so I can get to the hard stuff or get to the fun stuff?
I mean, that's very interesting. And it's, it just lends to the credibility of like the context being key, the individual, what they're training for. And, in full admission, I don't do a ton of research on who the avatar of the program is. I mean, obviously I, know who you are and know what you're about. But those are really important things that, again, we talked about this kind of, in depth about going away from just scientific research and textbook definitions, because sometimes there are outliers. I've done things that you wouldn't be able to explain. Like I do full body circuits quite regularly on one of my subscriptions. It's, we'll do a squat, a upper pull, an upper press, and a hinge in a 4 exercise circuit. And we'll rest 45 to 60 seconds between movements. So by the time you go back to the first movement, you've rested, in essence, 3 minutes, not full nervous system, but you've rested. I've done those circuits and I've seen people get very strong where they're, we might get to 5 rounds. In the 5th round, they're hitting a 5 RM PR on their front squat. I've done it myself. And I thought, I've tested this. I'm like, I can't explain it, but I hit a PR on my front squat. Right. And I wouldn't, normally textbook, I'd say, well, if I want to hit a PR on my front squat, I should just front squat, build to a 5 RM or whatever RM I'm doing. But I saw that I actually felt better going through that 4 exercise circuit.
Yeah.
And, you have some, pushing and pulling, and, obviously the hinge can, depending on what the hinge movement is, can potentially support and potentiate the front squat. But I saw that to be the case. And I use those 4 exercise circuits on one of my subscriptions. And again, it's a lot of former CrossFitters and they love it because it's like the hybrid of both. It feels like it's strength training, but it kind of feels like conditioning. So people love it. I mean, it's not just for full disclosure, if you train at a commercial gym, it's not a very good way to train because you can't hog up 4 pieces of equipment. But most of my people are home gym like myself. I can squat, hinge, and push and pull in the same circuit. And it's, in 30 minutes time, you've got a full workout done. Yeah. So again, it's not, if you looked at it, you'd be like, what is this? Like this doesn't seem like it could.
That's the fun. I mean, that's the continued fun and excitement of program design is how do we create new experience for people without venturing too far away from fundamentals, not getting into things that, like you call out oftentimes in your reviews, it's like, this is just not safe. This is putting too much risk in the, in the pursuit of novelty and variety and something that's hard. It's unnecessary. So how do we work that line? And I know I'm guilty of having done things in the past that were like pushing a bit of the novelty too far. And as a result, it was like, this didn't work for our clients. And so with our program, we have kind of a group of testing athletes that work well ahead of the general population to put some of these, put the programs to the test. And I take that feedback pretty seriously. It's like, hey, you explored having essentially heavy hinging, 2.5 times, it was like twice as a strength piece in a week and once showing up in conditioning, and we're all kind of getting blown up from that. And that's not really working. And yeah, you're right. That's not going to be ideal for our target population, the people that we're trying to help look good, move well, feel better. Sure. So let's make an adjustment before that goes live in 6 weeks, because we're 6 weeks ahead, with that group of people. But anyhow, I think that was probably the biggest call out that you had. And, there were some other things where it was like, looking at, doing some of our power work or our speed strength work, and mostly that was Olympic lifting, and combining Olympic lifting with plyometrics or burpees or things like that, which as a former CrossFit coach, or maybe now having the context of like, okay, who's the avatar of this particular track? It's people who are interested in that they find joy in that, and they've likely, in my cell of that program, it's like, you have the skill to, like, I know I can go and do burpees, box jumps, and snatches safely, effectively. As I get more fatigued, oftentimes my technique and my precision gets better because I'm more focused. I have that experience. I know that's not true for every client that does it, but my assumption, and the assumption for those people coming in, what they're told is, hey, like, you're going to see higher level skills. You're going to see them mixed together, and they're going to be in fatigue settings. And you should know how to do that. If that's not you, if you don't, if doing a hang snatch, after 5 burpee box jump overs isn't like, if that's completely new to you, then you should be starting, or not starting, but like, you belong over here doing more of what we would deem our kind of hallmark functional bodybuilding programs, which is our pump programs, where people are doing, and CrossFit light. It's like we're taking out all of these, high skill movements that really require a lot of dedication and time to developing skill, which most people just don't have the time for in their lives. They just like, hey, I'm here for 45 to 60 minutes to get a great strength and, conditioning session in. And I can only do that 3 or 4 days a week. And I don't think I want to spend the, 100 hours to learn the fundamentals of a snatch so that I can add that into my program.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, the context is definitely key. The individual who's using it, what their goals are. If you want to get better at CrossFit, then you need to have a wide array and be able to do things in a potentially fatigued setting. So I think that I always think about like some of the open workouts where it's, you're doing X, Y, and Z, and then you're doing a clean and jerk max. Yeah. And then for me, I would always be, I would always have to really pace myself on the conditioning part of it, because I would just be completely smoked. And again, for those listening, that's the aerobic system. The aerobic system has the ability to replenish ATP. And, so you can, if you have a better aerobic system, you're going to have more essentially gas in the tank, to fuel those higher intensity efforts that, the stuff that's, where something like the phosphagen system will predominate. You'll be able to fuel those efforts because you've been able to replenish ATP faster than you would if you had an impaired aerobic system like myself for all those years. So
cool. Well, thanks for, turning the questions back towards me, and I'm glad we could chat about that a bit. And
yeah, absolutely.
We should wrap here. And I do want to give you an opportunity to just point people to any online resources or just training resources that you really love, and that people who are writing programs or coaches out there, people just interested to understand what they're doing better, could look at.
Yeah, so you can check out any of my articles on Elite FTS, T Nation, my own website, jasonbrowncoaching.com. I've got a free Facebook group we just launched. It's called Fitness Programming Simplified. It's specifically for coaches. So we do a live in there every week. And, you can go in that group for free and just consume information. There's free downloads, conditioning methods, strength methods, all that stuff. You don't have to pay a dime for that. And again, all these articles, I've got collectively like around 1,000 articles all over the internet. And it's tough these days. I know a lot of people are not reading articles. We are actually working towards in 2024, putting a lot of these articles into video format, shooting videos for them, doing 2 programming reviews a week and 1 big long form video. Because, again, those articles were great resources, but, things have changed. So we're trying to evolve and do more content on YouTube. But yeah, you can consume all that stuff. Like I said, on my website, it's all there. It's free, and take advantage of it.
Awesome, Jason. Well, appreciate your time. Thank you for, sharing your wisdom and your experience. And where's somebody that where would you want somebody to go find you if they had one place to go and look for your content?
I would say Instagram, Jason Brown Coaching, Instagram. And from there, there's links to everything I mentioned.
Excellent. Cool, man. Well, I look forward to staying in touch, and I'd love to, be bouncing ideas off of each other, at least stay in a conversation in the future. And when we're out to the East Coast in future years, I'd love to come pay you a visit for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'd love that. We can, get the kids together and, have a good time and train. I'm sure you've got your kids working out with you. My 7-year-old can already do 3 dead hang pull-ups, which is pretty crazy. So, they're into it. They love it.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Yeah. Well, stay warm out there. Enjoy the holiday season. And thank you again for being on the show.
All right, brother. You too.